Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chatted with relationship crisis coach Puya Delavar. About 10 years ago, Puya was on the brink. His successful corporate career came at a huge price, as his marriage and his personal health were in crisis. He had successfully played the corporate game, giving his career everything and more, but realised he was about to lose the very thing that was most precious to him, and he wanted to change. It got so bad that his own doctor recommended that he should quit his job. He studied and researched how to repair the damage and recover his relationship, and this process of discovery not only led to what he calls holistic success, but it also led him on the path to helping other men who find themselves in the same life predicament. Puya's Crisis to Connection program helps men to face and embrace their emotions, and over 12 weeks he helps them to repair their relationships and prosper. Let's hear from Puya. Puya Delavar, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you keeping?
Great. Thank you, Greg. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I know you normally tune in from the UK, but you spend a lot of time in Germany, and you were telling me before we started recording, it's in a small little village. Describe the village to me.
Yes, of course. It's actually well known for the people who are aware of where it is. It's actually a town. It's called Bad Nauheim. And you notice with the German names, every town that has a BAD in front of it, it means it has some sort of natural spring in the city. So people who live in towns that have bad in front of them, they're very proud because it means it's a healthy town. But this town is specifically interesting because this is where Elvis stayed when he did his military service. So we have on an annual basis an Elvis festival, and people from all over Europe flood to Bad Nauheim, dressing in their 50s clothes and driving their 50s cars. So the whole town transforms, goes back 70 years. It's fantastic.
That sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, so it's basically close, half an hour north of Frankfurt for anyone who wants to look it up. It's a very pretty town. It's one of the only towns that didn't get affected by a Second World War. So it's very pristine in that sense.
I actually had Elvis Presley's cousin on the podcast last year.
Oh, wow.
Quite coincidentally, when the podcast was recorded, it was just before there was a huge annual gathering at Graceland. And she was talking to me about the event that was to come. She sent me a picture from the event, and she was with, is it Lisa Marie? And just a few days later, Lisa Marie had passed. Yeah, so it was one of those very, very strange coincidences. So your lovely story, and the reason I wanted you on the podcast, we connected on LinkedIn, and I noticed that you were a relationship crisis coach.
Right.
And exactly. I thought, now that we're at the beginning of the year, of course, we all make our New Year's resolutions or revolutions sometimes. Have a look in the mirror and take a bit of time to think about things, maybe with the benefit of having a week or two off around that Christmas break. And of course, we're a few weeks into the year, so we might have thrown all that away. But I deliberately wanted a few people at the beginning of this year to talk about some of those important things in our lives. And of course, relationships is a big one. And I know from the notes we've passed towards each other, and I spent a bit of time on your website as well and studying your guide that you can download, that relationships, and in particular to a corporate audience, who are all fully charged up about work and career and success, relationships can suffer by all of that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Before we get into all of that, what I'd like the listeners to do is to get to know you a little bit. So when they hear you talking about your special program that you run with your clients, They understand where you're coming from and your own journey that brought you to that point, and why I totally get why this character, Puya, why he is offering this service, which is so valuable. So, who the hell are you and where did you come from?
Sure. So it all depends on how far back we want to go, but let's
All the
go
way.
back all the way. Okay, well, if we're going to go all the way. I had an interesting upbringing. Actually, we were just talking about the fact that as a child, my family moved around from country to country quite often. So I ended up living in 5 different countries for at least a year each. So before I ended up in the UK, I spent 2 years in France going to school, learning French, and then ended up in the UK, did the whole thing again, ended up doing GCSEs. In any case, so this is where I was brought up, in London. London is the city I was brought up in. Eventually, life had a different plan for me, so it took me to Germany without really my intention. I just went there for work. I ended up meeting a wonderful lady who is now my wife. And obviously, there's always a girl involved in these stories. I ended up staying in Germany. And now I'm going back and forth between London and Germany, Bad Nauheim, where I'm staying.
But tell me, what had you moving from place to place? I presume that was related to the work that your mum and dad were doing.
Correct. Yes. So a little bit because of the work that my parents were doing. Obviously, I was too young at the time to decide, but there was also some political upheavals that made the decisions for us in a way. So the reason I ended up in France, because I actually lived in France for 2 years with my uncle alone. My parents couldn't support me at the time, so I ended up living in France by myself. They ended up eventually in the UK, where I ended up myself after the 2 years. At the time, I wasn't happy about it because I had settled down very well in France. I could speak fluent French and made a lot of friends. But obviously, starting from scratch again was a bit of a difficulty. But that's what happened. At the time, obviously, it's all very difficult. You only realize the benefits of having lived in different cultures, and you really get to understand the culture when you've lived with the people for a while, for at least maybe 6 months to a year. And I think, despite the drawbacks, I'm very thankful that my past has been so difficult in that sense. It's really led me to understand, I have a different perspective towards different cultures. And I think moving to Germany was, again, yet another one of those steps. So I'm very, very thankful for my past.
Yeah. And what age were you when you left your parents and went with your uncle to France?
So I spent between the years of 13 and 15 in Toulouse. This is where my uncle still lives today. So when I went at the age of 13, this is where I couldn't speak any French, but it just happened that it was beneficial for me to be there at that age. And yeah, so at the age of 13, obviously you learn languages a lot quicker, especially if you go to school and you want to make friends. So this is what happened. So between 13 and 15 is when I was at Toulouse.
Was that a huge adventure for you in your head, or was it heartbreak, I'm leaving my parents?
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of people who hear the story, they think, how could you have survived this? How could you be away from your parents? At the time, I think, yes, of course, there is always difficulty for, you always miss your parents. But I think the sense of adventure was too exciting for me. So I welcomed it, really. And it was very difficult to learn the language. And I also missed a little bit of school for not having spoken the language at the time. But I managed to catch up because I just had an enormous amount of determination to fit in well. And I made a lot of friends. And I think I still commend the people in Toulouse at the time. They were very, very, very welcoming, very happy, very warm. And that encouraged me to really make the effort.
Yeah, and so it was from Toulouse and on to England.
And from Toulouse to London, yeah. So I got to London at the age of 15. I actually lived in the UK previous to that. So for a good few years, up until the age of 5, I lived in the UK, but I lived in Bournemouth with my mother alone. And then, in any case, so I had a little bit of history, but obviously I didn't speak English as well. So when I landed in London at the age of 15, which is the pre-GCSE year, This is when, again, you almost had to start from scratch, learn the language, catch up to school. And I did all of that, and it worked out at the end. It was a bit of a struggle at the beginning, but it worked out at the end.
Yeah. And when you look back at that time, Puya, did you have no home, or was every place a home?
Home is a very interesting concept. So at the time, I didn't think about anywhere being home. Home was where I made things work. So I felt like I wanted to settle down in London, and I made the effort of making London my home, which it became my home eventually, of course. But at the time, I didn't have this notion of home in my mind, set in stone, so to say. I was a bit of a nomad because of how often we've actually traveled.
And tell me, this multilingual, much travelled young man back in London, what were your thoughts and dreams? What career did you pursue? What things were you interested in?
At the time, I was interested in anything that was new. I had a number of passions, but and one of my passions stayed with me, and that's photography. I've always loved photography, I think, for as far as back as I can remember. But interestingly enough, every time I mentioned that I want to become a photographer, I was discouraged. Oh no, that's not a profession that's going to make you successful. Obviously, they meant financially. But luckily, I kept it as a hobby, and it's still one of my absolute loves in my life, photography. But in terms of career, at the time, I didn't have one. But eventually, I went into the world of a mixture of business and finance, which both of them disappointed me eventually. What I ended up really enjoying, and I only noticed that only after I started, when I left university and I started working, was the interaction with people. That I would say is number one love of my life. That really pushed me to pursue what I'm doing right now.
Because as usual, LinkedIn is a great source of information, and I could see the path of maybe a typical white collar business professional out in the world. I could see the different companies you worked with, some fine brands there like Merrill Lynch. You were that serious business career person from the looks of it. You punched in many, many years for some of those companies.
Yes, I after I left university, my career took me into finance. So I'd like to say I'm proud of that period, but I'm not sure if I am because of what was needed to survive in that environment. So I was in, like you said, in at Merrill Lynch for 7 years at Merrill Lynch. I worked with Barclays Capital, and I generally got involved with what's called electronic trading, which was very new at the time, which is the trading of bonds and equities over the internet. And when I started doing this was all very new. Everyone had done it over the phone before, and now people started trading on electronically. So I was lucky to be able to enter this niche. But what I worked as really, it was what was called relationship manager from an early stage. And my role in multiple of these companies was to make sure that there's business continuity, and that meant understanding what the clients need, understanding what the different departments in our company needs, and understanding that every person has a motivation for what they do. So, and that came quite clear to me, and that helped me be successful in what was eventually my role as a business relationship manager.
A life without that clarity and without that motivation, in particular when you think about your working week and your 37 hours a week or whatever, that's a pretty hard week if you don't have that, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And 37 is probably the minimum that most people that I knew spend in those positions. I would say anything between 50 and 60 hours was acceptable.
You were that soldier, were you? Punching in long
Unfortunately,
hours and
unfortunately, yes, Greg. And I'm really not proud of it because I don't think this helped me very much. Again, I don't regret generally anything from my past, but I don't see that as something that we should be doing, anybody, or as humans, putting those many hours.
but yet, Puy, we do it. We get sucked into that idea, and it probably starts in your early 20s. And yeah, you're at the bottom rung of the ladder, and you're hungry for success and you want that promotion in work. And of course, with the promotion comes a wage increase, and suddenly that means you can buy a nice car, and then maybe you can think about buying a house, going to the bank and getting a mortgage. And then, of course, there's a layer of pressure then because you've got used to all of that income. So now you're on that ladder and you think, oh, wow, when I go a bit further or I change to another role in a different company, it's going to get even better and better. And in a way, when happy is rooted in all of that. I remember one beautiful, beautiful Saturday morning in early May. And it's one of those mornings when you're full of the promise, maybe it's going to be a wonderful summer because the weather is so good today. I was walking around town on a Saturday with Deirdre, my other half. I think we were spending time with the kids. I had every reason for being happy and bright and positive. And it was the opposite. I thought my head was going to burst. And I remember thinking, okay, this is in a work context. I need to get out of here. There was a lot of pressure for a number of reasons, a lot of it quite deliberate. And I thought, okay, I've played this game, and for my own sake, I don't even think it was a choice. I think it was a conclusion that for survival's sake, I need to get out of this. So ever since then, my pure objective is to win happy. And the ingredients for that, I would even rob some of the language on your website. It's about holistic success. And that's why, again, I really wanted to talk to you today. So I presume on that big career path, and you were quite successful in everything. You had married your wife and you had children. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. So I have two kids now. One is 10, one is 13, two wonderful girls. And yes, that was the time, especially at the time when I was at Merrill Lynch, was when I started my family. So my first kid was born 13 years ago. And your story, it really resonates well with me because what you're talking about is exactly how I felt. And this idea that this is what success means was somehow programmed into me, at least, or at least a lot of the people that I know. And this is what I perceived as what I should be doing. As this is my goal, and it is almost never ending. There's always a next promotion or the next house or car that you can buy, and it is that constant pursuit of something that is never going to be reached. It was what was making me very depressed, and this is where I had my real big crisis just over a decade ago.
Yeah, and in a way, at that level, they own you. The expectations of you is everything for the job. And you are on that trajectory. So you are a slave to it in many respects. Now, we're not going to take out loads of tissues. We were well-paid people and we had a lot of the trappings of success. But was it success at all? So you mentioned, Puya, that there was a crisis about 10 years ago. Could you share some of that with the listeners?
Yes, of course, no problem. So the crisis really happened when that false sense of success, I would say, it was definitely a financial success, but I realized that it was eating away at me. And I say I realized. I didn't realize it at the time. What I realized was the effect that it had on me. It had an effect on my health. It had an effect on my relationship, on my personality. And I generally thought things are going well, and this was what was fueling me to carry on. But I felt a certain emptiness, which I didn't know how to fill. And then I mentioned that it had an effect on my health. My doctor actually once said, I am officially writing in the system that I recommend that you leave your job. I think that was an interesting moment. And I told my wife, and she said, well, she's right. I don't recognize you anymore. So that was a bit of a wake-up call. And I realized, okay, well, I can't carry on this way. I was already on the verge of separating with my wife because things had gone so bad that I felt completely helpless. I was in this pit and I didn't know how to get out of. I didn't know what I was doing wrong, and that was the main problem. I felt completely helpless, and I was desperately trying to find someone who can tell me, okay, well, if you do this, then things will get better.
Yeah.
And the difficulty was that I thought I was doing everything right. Everyone else is doing the same thing around me. So it was an absolute illusion, and a very detrimental one as that. And the reason I call it a big crisis is because I really almost lost my family. I almost that my first kid was born, so in early years of my marriage, and my first kid was born, and I really the idea of losing my wife and kid was an absolute nightmare, and I wanted to avoid that.
It's kind of strange, Puya, in that what you're describing, it's not a case of one day you're all very happy and the next day you're not because of the job. This is so incremental, it's not funny. And your career guidance doctor jumped in suddenly and wrote you a prescription, a very, very tangible prescription as to how to solve your problem. It's probably encouraging to the medical profession that that's what they did and that's what her role was, as opposed to, and I'm sure that would have been an easy thing, to write you a prescription for some antidepressants or whatever. I can just even imagine you saying to your wife in front of the crying children in a fight, don't you realize I'm doing this for you? The money, and that's why I'm working so hard. And that might be true a little bit, but we're kind of missing the point, aren't we?
Absolutely. It's so interesting. You almost described it perfectly. And I think this is such a common problem where men, especially men who succeed in their career so well, almost feel entitled to get away with anything just because, well, they're doing so well, career-wise. So they're bringing in the money. So why are they not being appreciated for that sacrifice that they're putting in? So yes, absolutely. And I was under that false pretense that I'm working so hard. How can you not see what I'm doing for us?
Yeah. So what are the symptoms of that person?
Well, definitely a feeling of emptiness. So the idea that you don't have a purpose. So you think your purpose is really just to progress in your career, but there's this sense of feeling of emptiness is one problem. The failing relationship is very clear. So you know how things were in the past in your relationship, and it's very obvious that they're not the same anymore. The looming divorce was hanging over my head, so that was also very clear. So there was a number of symptoms that very clearly showed me, well, I can't carry on this way. Something needs to happen. Something needs to change, basically.
When you speak about a looming divorce, was that an active conversation? Was that someone saying, if you don't change, Puya, this is going to end, I'm going to have to leave you? Was it as tangible as that, or was it just a feeling?
It started with a feeling, but when things weren't getting better, it was verbalized. Yes, it was mentioned that this isn't how things were supposed to happen, and it's going to end. If nothing changes, things are going to end. So, yes.
Can you describe that home to me? At that point in time, what was the atmosphere like? And what was the environment that your two young kids were enjoying or not enjoying the early years of their life, as the case may be?
Yeah. So it was a time where my kid was 1 year old. So my first kid. So my second kid wasn't born yet, luckily at the time, because it was a terrible time. But I had the sense of I was trying to avoid going home as much as I could, because I felt that at work, I'm the hero. I've done everything well. Here, everyone appreciates me. So, and this is where I can excel. So I know how to do this well. And I knew that the longer I spend time here, the better I get. But at home, I was failing. So I avoided going to a place where I obviously failed and tried to stay as long as possible at work. And when I did go home, there was obviously an atmosphere that was very unpleasant. There was clearly a resentment built up from both sides. So the smallest problem became a volcano. So we erupted into an argument. It was just impossible to have this balance, to be able to talk normally. Everything was a problem. Everything was a heartache. A constant reminder of why things are not working was apparent. And in general, the complete lack of intimacy, a complete lack of proper communication. It was a nightmare. I really, when I think back, it really brings back quite a lot of negative emotions, and I'm glad that it's over.
Yeah. And in the work environment, for you to turn around to your colleagues and say, well, listen, it's 5:30 now, I'm off home. Or that client dinner tonight, no, I promised my wife that we'd have 2 nights in every week with me not working, and tonight is our night. Or that trip over to wherever, I'm really sorry I can't go because our wedding anniversary falls on that weekend. And they're not easy conversations to have in the workplace.
No, they're not, because especially in a position where you've proven that you're ready to put in the effort and further, there's an expectation from you that you're not going to say no. If an opportunity comes up, you have to take it. Otherwise, someone else will. It's such a jungle, especially in that environment of the investment banking environment that I was working. Everybody wanted a piece of the success. So if you didn't step up, there was definitely the next person who was willing to do it. And so nobody wanted to miss out on an opportunity. So you're absolutely right. It was almost a must. You had to show that you were willing to give in your 100% and more. So there was not a conversation. It was more an order that you had to follow.
Yeah. And maybe taking that on board, that we don't flog ourselves too badly, because that was the environment. I'm not sure what the work environment will be right now if it was us in our 20s in 2025, if you know what I'm saying. I know in my environment, when I was, I had young children. Yeah, you were seen as a chicken shit
Yeah.
if you wanted to go home early. And I remember at a meeting, I swear to God, there was a particular meeting, our second child was just born, and my boss drew a picture of me on a flip chart, and he drew a thumb and put the thumb on my head. And he said, "This is you." And yeah, we had a big argument. Ellen, my daughter, was just born. I needed to, and I mean just, I'd missed a management meeting because I had to mind Brendan. Mm-hmm. And I was called into the office, and instead of saying, "Congratulations on your new child," the conversation was, "Why the fuck weren't you at the meeting?"
Right.
And I said to him, "I put this place first all of the time. And this is one time when I didn't, because I absolutely couldn't. And you can do what you want with your job." Right. But it was one of those moments. But that was the environment that we were working in, and going home early, not going for the meal, not going for drinks after the meal, and maybe even hitting the nightclub or whatever. They were the sins of someone who wasn't committed to the job. Yes. So there is a backdrop to everything that you were talking about that isn't all in the making from your point of view, or my point of view, I think, as well at the time. So what did you do to change?
So that scenario that I explained, where my doctor said, "You have to quit," and I came home and my wife said, "Of course, I don't recognize." That was, I think, the slap in the face for me, to wake me up to realize, okay, well, I cannot continue this. Something needs to happen. and the thought of losing my family, my 1-year-old daughter, not the idea of not being able to see her, this was a strong enough motivation for me to realize, okay, well, I need to change my priorities. Then I started looking into, okay, what can I do to make this relationship survive? Because that became my priority at the time. I said, okay, I'm going to do absolutely everything just to make sure things get back to, not just get back to normal, but maybe, that they can go back to how it was before, how happy we were, because we were very happy at the beginning. And that motivation got me to look into what I need to do different. So I started reading books. I started listening to experts, podcasts. There is luckily a lot of good information, good, let's say, research studies out there that somehow are missed, which was to me strange. And I realized, if I had known this earlier, things would have been very different. So I continued this journey, and the fact that I was putting the effort in already showed my wife that I don't want to end things. That was already good. But luckily, the education I gave myself with a combination of what was this science-based, let's say, tools, and a different mindset that I can get a situation if I work hard enough at it. That combination got me the success. So got me to be able to slowly realize how wrong I used to be when it came to thinking about relationships, and actually putting in the effort, putting the work, changing the way I managed to communicate with my wife. And slowly, I came up with a method that I then followed myself, very regimented method, that got me out of that horrible situation and gave me the right balance. So I put in the right amount of energy in my relationship. I realized that I am extremely grateful for what I had. And I put in the effort, and year after year, it got better, and eventually got to a stage where things were even better than before. I can clearly say that. So my second kid was born, and I left the financial industry. I left the investment banking, got into a different industry, still was a relationship manager, but in a different industry. I just wanted a break. And it got me to a stage where I managed to balance out my career together with my personal life in a way that I could succeed in both areas, really.
So you discovered the secret sauce.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And at what point and how did it come about, Puya, that you decided, I'm going to start my own business and this is what I'm going to do, in providing that secret sauce and helping other couples with their relationships? When did that penny drop?
Sure. It wasn't actually a penny, so to say. So what happened was when I managed to survive this pitfall, I made it known to my friends, to my colleagues. And I said, well, I managed to do it. I look at my relationship now. So I was very proud of what I achieved. And the word got spread, and there were other people who were in the same situation as I was. I kept in touch with a lot of my old colleagues from investment banking. They came to me and said, well, you know how we feel because you felt the same situation. Can you help us? So I ended up helping out other people who were in my situation, purely because when I was in that situation, I couldn't find anyone that could help me. So I was very happy to be that person for them. So I ended up helping friends and colleagues with their own relationship. And I saw a lot of success, which was really good. That was still not, let's say, as you say, the penny that dropped for me to think, okay, I want to do this as a career. The difficulty in my relationship started 10 years ago. I would say 4 or 5 years after that, I was definitely in a good situation. That's when I was helping others. 2 years ago, I decided that I want to leave the corporate world. It was just not fulfilling enough for me anymore. And I decided to take on a different path. And I decided that since this is an area that I'm able to excel at, and I worked out so well, and I enjoyed so much, and it's just so much more fulfilling to be able to know that you've helped someone else. Let me try to make that my career rather than what I was doing for the corporations. and at the beginning, it was basically word of mouth. So people who had helped, I had helped, they spoke to others, and then it came to me. And then I started charging for this since a year and a half ago or so. It's only about 6 months ago where I decided to take this online and started a website and started to market it on LinkedIn. So it's fairly new, but I've been doing this, let's say, for the past 5 or 6 years.
That experience of this suddenly being a business and offering this as a service, that must have been strange for you at the beginning, because I can understand all day and all night how you're going to help some of your pals or your former work colleagues. But, now we're going to market this service to people I've never met or I don't know at all. That must have been a leap.
Yes, definitely a leap and definitely a steep learning curve. It's one thing you having a guaranteed salary coming in, another thing that relying on an income from a source that you've never really tapped into before, which is entrepreneurship. But yes, so speaking to family and friends is one thing because you have the basic knowledge about them. You know them a little bit. You know what the relationship. You might have even met their partner. But strangers is a different thing. Although what I notice is that even though everybody's situation is different, there is certain patterns that seem to be repeating, and that's what made me realize this is something that I can apply my method to different situations and still get success out of it. And what I specifically try to work on is to make sure that I make every situation unique, because everyone's position is different to others. So, and this is the problem that I had when I was trying to seek help. I found the help that was out there just too generic. That's why it just didn't apply to me. So I try to make sure that I understand every client's situation perfectly so that I can address their issue, because everyone's unique problem can be addressed in a different way.
I've noticed a few things that you've said. And you mentioned that you were so proud of the U-turn that you managed to achieve in your relationship. And again, I'm going back to that culture with guys. It's probably something we don't talk about. We'll talk about how good we are at tennis or football or whatever, or on our skiing trip. Or we'll talk about how great work is going and the promotion I got and the bonus. It's not the manly thing really to talk about the pride you have in my successful relationship. Certainly not over a few pints. That maybe at an extreme level you might whisper to one of your closest friends. But it's so important, and we should be doing that. Something I noticed in your notes, you spoke about how men specifically think, and that probably is at the root of some of these problems.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of things that I found that really shocked me. One of them is, when you find something out and then you realize, it's so obvious. How did I not know this before? And there was a lot of these moments when I found out about relationships. So one of them was that the glue that keeps relationships together is emotions. Without emotions, relationships are not possible. And men are typically, exactly like you said, they're not the best at facing their emotions, and they're even worse about when it comes to talking about their emotions. So facing your emotions, facing your vulnerability, coming from a position of strength from a guy's standpoint of view was very, very important. This was a complete eye-opener for me. The other one was the fact that the relationships in general really dictate a lot of what happens in our lives. And this was a pattern that I noticed, that the ones who are in successful relationships or happy relationships, the other aspects of their lives are also a lot simpler and easier and generally more successful. The ones where they're suffering, the other aspects of their lives also suffer. So really, this relationship, the connection we create with one person, is so fundamental in how the quality of our life really is. And these are the things that, again, at the time I found them out and I really put energy and focus in it, and I realized, okay, we need to create more awareness on guys facing their emotions. We need to create more awareness of how important relationships are in our lives. So absolutely, exactly like you say, it is a bit of a difficult challenge to try to get guys to talk about their emotions, to open up and dig deep and realize that it's okay to feel vulnerable. It's okay to show weakness when it comes to relationship and the lack of knowledge that we generally have on how we're supposed to manage these.
I think with men in general, we're quite capable of doing it when we're hunting for a mate. We're quite capable of being sensitive and vulnerable and doing all the lovely romantic gestures and making lots of time for that person. But then once that relationship beds down, we can quite easily then revert to being the person who isn't in touch with their emotions, and certainly to your buddies and all that kind of stuff. You don't win too many prizes by having a big conversation about how wonderful the relationship with my wife is, or my partner, whatever.
Now we seem to want to put on a mask in front of others,
Yeah.
And somehow hide this authenticity. And authenticity is so important in life in general, but especially in relationships. If you're not true to yourself and show your real self, it's very difficult for your partner to see you as who you are. And without authenticity, relationships can't thrive.
Well done you for rescuing that relationship, and the price of not doing it. Now, we can talk about money, of course. It makes an awful lot of sense that, suddenly you've solicitor bills and you've schools and people fighting and who pays for what. And, of course, a lot of that overhead comes from the anger between the two partners. A lot of solicitors make so much money. It's like happy days. I've got this couple coming through to me, and my God Almighty, they're at it hammer and tongues, which is a guaranteed payday for the solicitor. And apologies to any solicitors that are listening, but it can be a shitstorm, and they make a lot of money. And I think if you're happy and content, and you create that culture around you, then, as you say, the other parts in your life should work a lot better. You speak in the book about that holistic success, and you have 3 pillars. Can you talk to me about them?
Yes, of course. So out of on my website you could have a look at the 3 pillars. So one of them is what I call the personal and financial success, and this is everything to do with what we put into our career and personal development. And I think the reason I call it holistic success is because I think to be generally, let's say, feeling as if you are, you have a direction, you have a purpose. That's the right word. If you have a purpose, I think all these areas need to be filled. So you need to feel that you're putting effort into your career and personal development. And this is why I always talk about balance. I never say one success should come at the cost of another. We should find a way to be able to balance all of them. So when we talk about ambitions and everything to do with personal development, that falls onto the category of the first pillar, which is the career and personal development. The second pillar to me is health and personal well-being. And again, that sometimes doesn't get the right level of attention. And I talk about that purely because, again, I see how detrimental the unbalanced health was for me, and how it created a difficult situation for me. So if we want to succeed overall, if you want to feel that we have purpose in life, it's very important to pay attention to your health and personal well-being. Now, health, not just physical health, but also mental health. So I talk about creating the kind of vitality and resilience that you can manage anything that life throws at you, really, both physically and mentally. But the last pillar is what I see most people really struggling with, which is, well, at least the people that I'm working with right now, is when it comes to that personal and romantic relationship. And these are the 3 pillars that, to me, create a holistic success. And when we put too much emphasis on one and not other two, or even two and not the third, it doesn't give us the level of happiness, in my opinion, that we can manage, we deserve. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. There's a client that we have, and he always talks about the three legs of a stool. And if you take one away, the stool, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Tell me about your program and how does it work? What's it called, by the way?
So my program is called Crisis to Connection. And I called it that because, again, based on personal experience, I really go back to the time where I felt like I was in a crisis and there was a complete lack of connection. So I called my program Crisis to Connection. And it's a 3 month program. So it's a 12-week program. And I recommend to at least attend it for 3 months. I have clients that decide to stay longer, just to make sure that things carry on being the way they are, because they're happy in their current situation. And that 3 months program really has three main phases that you go through. The first phase is what I call analysis and crisis management. And that's where you really need to understand what your relationship state is at. So what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, to understand yourself better, your partner better, and your relationship better. And this is an area where you paint a big picture of your relationship. So you're basically mapping out your relationship, and you're analyzing this just so you can understand what you need to work on and what you're already doing well. The next phase is what I called foundation building. And this is where once you've mapped out your relationship, you understand the dynamics, you understand the patterns that you recognize. What do you typically argue about? What do you typically work well with? Once you understand these, you go to the foundation building stage where it involves education and putting into action. So when I say education, this is where I heavily invested time in understanding from books and research. And there's a lot of experts out there who spend their whole life doing this. And I've gathered all that information and applied it to different situations. So you basically understand that when you say something, it might be perceived differently by your partner. You have to understand the underlying reason behind your arguments. You have to see that things might not appear as you thought that they would. You have to be conscious of certain facts that men are typically completely oblivious on. When this, one of the examples of this is the menstrual cycle of women. And it might seem as if it's not important, but it's so crucial when it comes to making repairs. So if you want to discuss something with your wife that is important, it might, the awareness that where your wife is in this menstrual cycle could have a huge effect on whether that conversation is going to be successful or not. So just basic awareness is needed, just so that you can do things the right way. You can create connection. You can speak a language with your partner so that you don't miss each other. And let me give you examples, because this is all very, very generic. So if you end up in a situation where your partner might say, "Oh, you never do this. You never put the dishes in the dishwasher. You just put them near the dishwasher." Something that sounds very trivial. Or says, when you never do the laundry, or you never pick things up from the bag. I'm just making examples. It could be really anything. You have to understand is that what is the underlying the reason for her not being happy, or for her complaining, or if you yourself are complaining about something, what is the underlying reasons you have? And there's generally three typical needs that we have in a relationship, and those needs are a need for feeling close to someone. That means you need to feel like you're cared for, that you have intimacy, that you have trust. Then there's the second need of feeling valued, which means having recognition, having the right level of respect, and that you put in the right amount of contribution. You put the equal amount of contribution towards the relationship as your partner. And the third need is that you need to feel like you're fairly treated in the relationship. That equality, that sense that your priorities matter as much as your partner, and that you have the same level of entitlement. It all falls onto that being fairly treated. So anytime any of these three needs, or a combination of these three needs, isn't met, you end up in a discussion, you end up in an argument. So what I do is I go through with my clients through the typical arguments that they have on a regular basis, and we find out what needs are not met, which are causing these arguments. And all of this is to create a different level of awareness so that things don't go amiss. So you don't say things without realizing why you're saying it, or you don't act in a resentful way without realizing what is the underlying problem that is deep down that is causing you to behave this way. It's basically peeling the onion to realize that everything comes down to certain basics that we then pile things on top of, and we get to a situation where we just cannot communicate anymore. So what I do is create that level of awareness, peel the onion just to get to the bottom of things. Once we have that awareness, then we go on to taking different action. So if you notice, for example, that your wife is complaining about a specific thing and the underlying reason is because she's missing closeness, she's missing the feeling that she's being cared for, then you take action by very gentle comments or a brush on the shoulder or just behaving differently. And that slow progression gets you to a situation where you realize that you're communicating again. You're communicating with your actions, you're communicating verbally, and you're connecting again. This is really the second phase that with right level of education and the right actions gets you to a stage where you clearly see progress. And I'll get to the third stage in a second, but what's important at this stage is that you understand that there is always in every relationship a bedrock where everything is built on. And that bedrock is the fact that you both want to be in this relationship. Of course, if the relationship gets to a situation where it's not possible to be together anymore, and I never 100% recommend that people stay together, because it only works if you still think that you want to give it a go and you don't want to give up just yet. So if you do have that feeling, it's very important to understand that bedrock so that every time you have a difficulty and you have a crisis and an argument, you can fall back on that bedrock and say, okay, we're angry at this and this is pissing me off, or this behavior is, I feel unfair. But at the end of it, what we have to realize is that we want to stay together. So that's the second phase. And the last phase is making this knowledge and awareness and action your daily routine. You make it the new norm. And before you realize, things improve in such a way where I've had clients that said, we thought things were good at the beginning. We never realized how good it could have been with this level of awareness and knowledge and action. So you really can thrive in a relationship with the right level of knowledge and intention.
And Puya, is it always a couple that comes to you, or might it be an individual who's a bit like you 10 years ago? I'm up shit creek. I think I'm after making a right bad job of my relationship. I think it's going to unravel. It's gone beyond repair, but I really need to. So is it always the couple, or can it be one of the people who's involved in that dance coming to you?
Dance. I love the way you put it. It really is a dance. So it's actually always, so far, it's been the man, so the husband or the man in the relationship that has come to me. And actually encourage that, and I don't have anything against having women as clients by any means. It's just that my method and my knowledge is based on personal experience. So when I speak to my clients, it's important for me to be able to feel how they feel, or understand at least how they feel, and I can say, okay, I understand, and I've been there before, and this is what needs to happen. So because I base everything on personal experience, all of my clients so far have been men, and not the couples.
So does that mean it's the guy that comes to you saying, "I'm in trouble here, I need help," and
Yes.
does he do the program, or does he then invite his wife or his partner to participate in it together? Is that how it works?
So the program is designed for the one person.
Okay.
Of course, nothing is ever going to work if the partner has absolutely no intention of staying in a relationship. But it's normally been the case where the guy is in trouble because he feels that there's losing something without realizing what he can do about it. So he comes to me for guidance to be able
Yeah.
to save the relationship.
So suddenly she's like, "Oh my God, what's after happening with Greg? He put his hand on my shoulder and he asked me gently, 'Are you okay?'"
Yeah, who are you?
Oh God Almighty! Yeah, he's not running out the door and slamming it, saying, "I'm off to the pub for a few pints with my friends."
Yes, exactly.
How can people get in contact with you?
Well, my website, I would say, is the first step.
You better spell out the website for my listeners,
Yes, of
because
course.
for me calling out your name, I'd say already they're thinking, "What did he say?" So my Cork accent isn't going to do it any favors. So you go for it.
Yes, sure. So my full name is Puya Delavar. And my website is basically puyadelavar.com without any breaks in between Puya and Delavar. So Puya spells Puya, and Delavar is spelled Delavar, and .com. So you can go to my website, or you can probably find me on LinkedIn, like we have, and you can just send me a message if you have a LinkedIn account. You can reach me on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, and your sessions happen on Zoom, isn't it? You do them typically on Zoom.
Yes, I do them on Zoom, and I do three sessions a week, and I stick to one-on-one sessions, so it's very personalized. And two sessions involve the phases that I talked about. So we have a discussion to unravel the onion. And the third session is what I call a mindset mastery, which again is something that I definitely recommend everybody doing regardless of their situation, and it definitely helped me a lot. And this is a combination of putting intention into your awareness and basically understanding yourself better. And I also go through a small guided meditation session. And as soon as I mention meditation, a lot of people think, "Oh, yeah, that's not for me." In fact, it has been extremely successful. I always recommend to at least attend the first four, and I haven't had anyone who hasn't attended all of them. So it's extremely therapeutic because most of the people I work with, and I was the same, the attention we have is always external. We always focus on everyone else and everything else outside of. And this is a break from that and taking the attention and focus from the external to the internal, just so that we can focus on what is going on in our minds and in our hearts, and that is extremely grounding. And so that's the third session I provide on a weekly basis.
What's happiness to you?
What is happiness to me? Happiness to me is when you're able to look at your life and feel like you have purpose. And most of the people that I work with, they lack that. They don't understand what it even means to have purpose in life. They're guided by something else that has been programmed for them, probably a long time ago, either childhood or by society or university or whatever. And when you understand what your purpose in life is and you're able to appreciate every aspect of your life with the right balance, to me, that's happiness. So you're not, as you mentioned early in our podcast session, you said you're not enslaved to any any aspect of your life. You're free from that.
It's funny, on the podcast I did with Mick Brennan, my cousin, at the beginning of the year. He said when he was growing up, he was tortured by this whole thing about life. What's life about? What's the meaning of life? Why are we here? All that kind of thing. And his discovery, and he actually used the words at the end of the podcast, which is exactly what you said, is having a purpose. And winning. You've been in business. You've had targets. You know you get that adrenaline rush when you hit your numbers, you do all of that. I always say to people that you might love playing football, but if there were no goalposts, it might seem a little bit pointless. So we kind of need those. For you, you have been a businessman. You have been in the world of business. You've been successful. Do you have objectives? Have you got little goals? What does winning look like now?
Winning, that's very good. So obviously, my priority is to make sure that my family is happy, and I'm able to continue doing what I'm doing now, which to me is now my purpose. And I think I'm fortunate enough to be able to have discovered my purpose at this stage of my life, at least. And I want to make sure that I'm able to expand on this. So at the moment, I'm helping a lot of people, but I'm a one-man show. So I hope that I'll be able to reach out to more people, because I 100% believe that there is a need for more attention to repairing our relationships and bringing the right level of focus. And I hope that I'm able to do that. And that's my goal, really. And I started this thing because I believe in it, and I want to make sure that I'm successful. So my goal is to be able to reach out to as many people as I can and learn how to do that.
My very last question. For me, winning happy is making choices along the way, along your life, to get closer to that thing that makes us happy, get as close as we can to winning happy and realizing what that is. So to that end, what was the best life choice you've made?
That's a really good question. I think I would say deciding to marry my wife would be the number one choice, because I don't think I've made any other choices that has resulted more in my happiness or contributed more towards my happiness than that one. I would say having made sure that that happens, so pursuing her and making sure I don't give up, and especially don't give up when things were bad. That would be, to me, number one. And the second choice that I think contributed towards my happiness is to realize that I can have a choice in the matter, that I don't have to be a slave, and this realization of the fact that my choosing is a lot more powerful than I realized. And when I choose to do something such as leaving the corporate world to do this, is a very scary thing. But because I decided, it's happening. And I think that is, to me, the second.
Fantastic. Puya, you've obviously done a lot of learning, and you were motivated by personal experience. You had a huge objective, which was saving the most precious thing to you, which was that relationship with your wife. What's her name?
Her name's Anna.
Anna. Well, yeah. Anna, this podcast is all about you. I suspect, and maybe you're experiencing this already, I suspect that from the moment you said, I'm going to put this service out there, you've had exponential learning just by doing, and that experience with all of these couples. And I do suspect that a very, very clever man is going to have to figure out very, very quickly, how can I expand this to help even more people, because there'll be a big queue around the corner of people who need your help.
Yes, I that's my hope also, because obviously I have a threshold on how many people I can talk to on a weekly basis. But my hope is that I can then expand the company so that, I'm not limited to what I personally can manage, so that I can reach out to even more people. That is really the ultimate goal going forward, to say in a few years' time, while keeping the right balance in my life, not overworking myself.
Puya, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Say hello to Anna for me. She sounds like a special woman. And listen, have a great evening.
Thank you, Greg. It's been wonderful talking to you. I've really, really enjoyed that. Thanks very much.
Me too. Thank you so much. Take it easy.
Take it. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.